The studio pulsed with anticipation, a living thing held together by whispered excitement and the electric hum of stage lights. The audience was packed, devoted fans, industry insiders, and those who just came for the spectacle. Some held signs, others clutched their phones, waiting to capture the moment. The air carried that particular energy, the kind that lingers before something big happens. At the center of it all, 3 chairs waited on the polished stage. 1 for the host, 2 for her guests. Tonight wasn't just any interview. It was the interview. Victoria Lang had built her career on moments like this. Conversations that started warm and ended in cold sweats. She didn't just ask questions. She unearthed them, peeled back the surface until there was nowhere left to hide. The audience adored her for it. The guests? Less so. Backstage, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock stood in the wings, minutes away from stepping into the light. They had done this before. Talk shows, press junkets, reunions. But something about tonight felt different. The weight of it settled between them, silent but heavy. Sandra adjusted the hem of her navy blue dress, smoothing invisible creases. "It's going to be fine," she murmured. Keanu, dressed in black, his presence effortlessly composed, glanced at her. A slow tilt of the head. "You think so?" Sandra hesitated just a second too long. Beyond the curtain, Victoria Lang sat poised, her hands resting lightly on her cue cards. Her suit, sharp and beige, was precision-tailored, just like her questions. The show's theme music swelled, a signal, a warning. She lifted her head. Showtime. The red curtain parted. The audience erupted. Keanu walked out first, offering his signature nod, a quiet acknowledgement rather than a performance. Sandra followed, radiant, waving, blowing kisses. If either of them felt uneasy, no one in the crowd would notice, but Victoria did. She watched them sit. Princess Trusser analyzed the way Keanu rested his hands, casual, but too casual. Noticed the way Sandra tucked her hair behind her ear, a nervous tick perhaps. Victoria filed it away. The applause settled. The tension did not. "Welcome to the show," Victoria said, her voice smooth as glass. "Oh, thanks for having us," Sandra replied, her smile effortless. "It's great to be here," Keanu added, his tone neutral. Victoria leaned forward slightly, just enough to shift the dynamic. "I think we can all agree." "It's fantastic to see you two together again. After all, decades of success, challenges, and of course, a pause, a blade unsheathed, a few controversies." The word landed. A ripple moved through the audience. Some laughs, some murmurs, the unmistakable energy of people realizing they were about to witness something they hadn't been prepared for. Keanu's jaw shifted, just a fraction. Sandra's fingers curled slightly on the armrest. The glance between them was barely a flicker, but it was enough. Victoria smiled, flipping her cue card. "But before we get into all that, let's start with something simple." She met their eyes, her own gaze unreadable. "What does it mean to be Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock today?" Keanu exhaled, slow and deliberate. Sandra leaned forward, and the game began. The question still lingered, hanging in the space between them, deceptively simple, but Sandra knew better. She took a measured breath, preparing to answer, but before a single word left her lips, Victoria's fingers tightened around her cue cards, her nails tapping once against the glossy surface. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. Almost. Keanu noticed. The audience, still caught in the glow of nostalgia, cheered enthusiastically. They had no idea they were no longer spectators. They were accomplices now, willing or not. Sandra exhaled. "It means recognizing the journey," she said, keeping her voice steady. "We've grown, we've changed, but at our core, we're still the same people who started out all those years ago." The crowd applauded. A safe, diplomatic answer, but Victoria only smiled. Not a warm smile, not the kind meant to reassure. This one was calculated. A slow reveal of teeth, just enough to hint at something waiting underneath. She flipped through her cue cards, letting the silence stretch just a second too long. "Interesting," she murmured. "Theatrics. A show of casual curiosity," but her eyes were sharp. "Hunting." Then came the first blow. "But did you really have control over your careers?" The studio shifted. A near imperceptible tightening of breath from the audience. A ripple of awareness. Sandra's fingers flexed against the armrest. Keanu didn't move. Victoria tilted her head. "Or were you just puppets of Hollywood, taking whatever roles were handed to you without actually having a choice?" The tension locked into place. The silence had weight now. Keanu's stillness was absolute. Sandra, caught slightly off guard, blinked once before masking the reaction. But Victoria saw it. She always did. The host leaned forward slightly, sensing blood in the water. Well, let's take you, Keanu. You were one of the biggest action stars of the 90s. Then you disappeared. Years passed before you resurfaced with John Wick. Was that your choice? Keanu inhaled, slow and controlled, orchestrating a response. I think, like anyone, I went through phases, he said. His tone was even deliberate. And not everything in life follows a perfect script. Some choices we make. Others come to us, and we decide whether to take them or not. Victoria's eyes gleamed. Not good enough. So in other words, he pressed, sometimes you took roles you didn't really want. Sandra chuckled, light, easy. A misdirect. That happens to every actor, she said smoothly. The perfect project doesn't always appear at the right moment. Victoria turned, eyes narrowing. So, Sandra, you've taken roles you hated? The audience tensed. Sandra's smile didn't waver, but something in her gaze sharpened. I've taken roles that, looking back, I might not do again. But hate? No. Every project has led me here. Victoria didn't flinch. But that sounds like a rehearsed answer. The temperature dropped. Sandra's expression remained poised, but Keanu moved for the first time, just slightly, a shift of weight. Not aggressive, just present. As an answer, Victoria, a beat. For the first time that night, she was the one caught off guard. It lasted only a fraction of a second before she recovered, flashing another effortless smile. Just a little more honesty, Keanu. He smiled back, slow and unreadable. Honesty doesn't need to be dramatic to be true. A murmur rippled through the audience. The balance of power shifted. Victoria wasn't one to accept defeat. She flipped to a new cue card. Her posture changed. More precise. More surgical. All right, she said, voice softer now. If we're talking about honesty, let's really dive into it. She turned to Sandra, gaze glinting with something dangerous. And many people say you could have been the greatest actress of your generation. Instead, you chose safe romantic comedies. Do you regret not taking bigger risks? Sandra didn't blink. The question wasn't just about her career. It was a direct strike at her legacy, at her worth. Keanu's gaze flicked toward her. Just a fraction of a second, a quiet check-in. But he didn't intervene. This was hers to handle. Sandra inhaled slowly, holding the silence just long enough to make Victoria wonder. That's interesting, she said at last, because I never saw my career that way. Victoria lifted a brow. You didn't? Sandra smiled, not defensive, not rattled. Just in control. People assume risk only means taking dark, intense roles, she said. But I chose to make movies that brought joy to millions. Isn't that a risk? Creating something pure without cynicism? You think that's safe? She tilted her head. I think it's one of the biggest risks an artist can take. The audience loved that. Applause, murmurs of agreement. Victoria, unmoved, she turned to a new card, a subtle shift in her expression. This time, her target was Keanu. And you, Keanu, she asked, voice dropping slightly. More personal now. Have you ever regretted something? A role you accepted, or one you turned down? The air thickened. Sandra's posture changed, leaning in almost imperceptibly. Watching, Keanu held still. There was something about the way Victoria had framed the question. It wasn't just about his career. It was about something else, something specific. He took a slow breath. Every choice I've made has led me to this moment, he said. The words were careful. Victoria didn't blink. Even the choices that made you lose something important? The silence was absolute. No laughter now. No murmurs. Sandra's brow furrowed. She knows exactly what she's doing. Keanu knew too. Because he knew exactly where this was going, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to follow. The question lingered, stretching the silence into something almost unbearable. Even the choices that made you lose something important. The audience held its breath. This time, it wasn't just a provocative remark. It was deeply personal. Keanu remained still. His deep, enigmatic eyes locked onto Victoria's, and for a moment, the entire studio seemed to bow to the silence. Sandra shifted slightly in her chair, tension visible in her posture. She knew this was dangerous territory, and worse. Victoria knew exactly what she was stepping into. Keanu inhaled slowly. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was a weight to it that was almost tangible. Life isn't just about professional choices, Victoria. Sometimes the decisions we make, or the ones we are forced to make, shape who we are. But that doesn't mean we regret them. Victoria tilted her head, pretending to reflect. Oh, so you've never had regrets? A flicker of something unreadable crossed Keanu's face. His jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. He would only regret not living, out of fear of what could have been. The audience, which had been completely silent, erupted into applause. But Victoria wasn't ready to back down. She picked up another card. Her demeanor shifted, more precise, more surgical. Keanu, your life has been marked by public tragedies. You've lost important people, faced difficult times, and yet you always appear serene. The public sees you as untouchable, almost a modern-day monk. Sandra immediately recognized the trap. Victoria was trying to force him into a moment of televised vulnerability, a moment of weakness for the cameras. Keanu clasped his hands over his knees. He didn't blink. A pain is part of the human experience. Sandra felt a chill. Keanu rarely spoke about his personal life. I'm no different from anyone else, he continued. We all experience loss. What matters is not the pain itself, but what we do with it. The raw honesty in his response made even Victoria hesitate for just a second, but only for a second. She turned to Sandra. And you, Sandra. Her tone was deceptively light. You've had your own challenges. You've talked about love in so many films, yet in real life, you never found someone to truly stay by your side. Why? A hush fell over the studio. The question was cruel, and everyone knew. Keanu's gaze flickered toward Sandra, a silent offering of support. Sandra blinked a few times. Then she let out a soft laugh. But it was different this time, low, filled with something Victoria hadn't expected. You know, Victoria, she began, her voice soft but firm. There are questions that reveal more about the person asking them than about the one answering. Victoria blinked, a flicker of surprise. She hadn't seen that coming, but Sandra wasn't finished. I did find someone. The studio fell into absolute silence. Sandra rarely spoke about her private life. Someone who loved me exactly as I am, who made me laugh, who shared his life with me, who gave me a family. She paused. And he's gone. And he's gone. The weight of those words pressed down on the room. Victoria's expression faltered. She realized her mistake too late. Brian Randall wasn't just my partner, Sandra continued, her voice unwavering. He was my home. And just because someone isn't physically here anymore doesn't mean the love disappears. No one moved. Even Victoria didn't seem to know how to respond. Keanu glanced at Sandra, then, without a word, placed his hand over hers. A silent, powerful moment. No words were needed. Sandra took a slow breath, regaining her composure. I have lived love, she said, and it's still with me. She held Victoria's gaze. Does that answer your question? Applause thundered through the room. For the first time, Victoria looked uncomfortable. She glanced down at her cue cards, realizing that, for the first time that night, she had lost control of the interview. Sandra and Keanu weren't just defending themselves anymore. They were turning the tables. And Victoria knew it. She swallowed hard. She had one card left. If she had any chance of regaining control, she needed to use it now. Lifting her eyes this time without smiling, she spoke. Keanu? Her voice was different now, less playful. There's something you've never spoken about in public. Sandra subtly shifted in her seat. She felt it. Something was wrong. Victoria continued. Something that could change the way everyone here sees you. The studio froze. Keanu's expression didn't change. He simply waited. Victoria leaned forward slightly. Are you ready to finally reveal the truth? The silence was absolute. Sandra's fingers curled slightly over the armrest. She didn't know what was coming next, but she knew it wouldn't be good. Keanu exhaled slowly. When he spoke, his voice was even. Oh, what truth, Victoria? It was a simple question, but it shifted the power. Again. Now she had to be the one to make the move. Victoria hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then she looked down at her cards, as if considering her next words carefully. For decades, people have admired your resilience, your kindness, your ability to remain humble in an industry that devours people. A murmur rippled through the audience, but many also wonder, how much of that is real? Sandra's eyes narrowed slightly. She understood exactly what Victoria was trying to do. Victoria continued. How much of Keanu Reeves is a persona? She let the words sink in. A carefully constructed image of a man who never loses his temper, who never makes mistakes, who is always the good guy. The tension in the studio reached its peak. The audience had been expecting something personal, something scandalous. Instead, Victoria had taken a different approach. It was more subtle, but just as dangerous. Keanu didn't react immediately. The silence stretched. Sandra, watching closely, could see the faintest flicker of something beneath his calm exterior. Then finally, Keanu leaned forward slightly. His voice, when he spoke, was impossibly quiet, but the words carried. You think kindness is an act? Victoria didn't answer. Keanu tilted his head just slightly. That says more about you than it does about me. The audience gasped. And for the first time that night, Victoria had no response. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and she wasn't in control anymore, not even close to its speed. Because we serve fast drinks and no one can slow us down. Keanu chuckled, shaking his head. That might be the worst idea I've ever heard. Sandra gasped in mock offense. Excuse me, I think it's genius. Picture it, signature cocktails themed after our movies, the Lake House Martini, the bulletproof tequila shot, and wait for it, the bomb on a bus. Keanu laughed. The bomb on a bus, what's in that? Sandra grinned mischievously. Something so strong you definitely shouldn't drink it while operating heavy machinery. Keanu shook his head, still laughing. You're unbelievable. She winked. I try. The mood had shifted, the weight of the interview fading into the background. They'd survived the fire and come out unscathed, stronger even. Sandra leaned back on the couch, exhaling. You know, today could have gone so differently, if we'd let it. Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful. Yeah, but we didn't. And that's what matters. She studied him for a moment. You ever think about how weird all of this is? Fame, interviews, the way people try to fit us into little boxes? Keanu gave a small, knowing smile. All the time, Sandra sighed. I used to care more about the narrative, about what people thought I should be. But now, I just want to live my life. Keanu nodded. That's the only thing that ever really belongs to us anyway. Sandra smiled. Damn, Reeves, that was deep. He smirked. You bring it out of me, Bullock. She laughed, nudging him. All right, philosopher, let's get out of here before someone asks us to go back on that stage. Keanu stood, offering his hand. Speed bar? Sandra grinned, taking it. Speed bar. As they walked out of the dressing room together, the echoes of applause still faintly lingering in the distance, they weren't just two actors leaving an interview. They were two friends. Two survivors. And for tonight, that was more than enough. The speed stop, where every drink comes with a countdown. Keanu chuckled, shaking his head. That sounds like pure chaos. Sandra grinned. Exactly. That's why it'll be amazing. Keanu took a slow sip of his water, eyeing her with amusement. You do realize people might panic, thinking their drinks will explode? She waved a hand dismissively. Hey, just adds to the experience. He smirked. You always know how to make things interesting. Sandra nudged him playfully. That's what best friends do, right? Keanu's expression softened. Yeah, that's what best friends do. She stretched, letting out a satisfied sigh. Okay, enough of this deep talk. I'm starving. Keanu smirked. The burgers. Sandra hooked her arm through his as they walked toward the exit. Burgers, no cameras, no spotlight. Just two friends, still standing, still connected. And in the end, that was all that mattered. But inside the studio, the air was still thick with tension. Victoria Lang sat at her desk, staring at her cue cards. She had one last question. She leaned forward, her expression sharp. The wood is always changing, new faces, new stories. The industry moves fast. Do you ever worry that you're being left behind? The audience tensed. It was a ruthless question. Keanu and Sandra exchanged a glance. Neither looked shaken. Sandra smirked first. Oh, Victoria, you make it sound like we're dinosaurs. The audience chuckled, but Victoria wasn't backing down. I'm serious. Careers in Hollywood don't last forever. Do you fear becoming irrelevant? Keanu leaned forward slightly. No, Victoria blinked. She hadn't expected such a direct answer. Keanu continued, his voice steady. Irrelevance isn't about being in the spotlight. It's about the impact you leave behind. People don't remember actors just for their films. They remember how those films made them feel. Sandra nodded. Hollywood is obsessed with newness, but audiences, they care about connection. And connection doesn't have an expiration date. Victoria studied them, realizing they weren't rattled at all. At all? So you're saying you don't fear being forgotten? Keanu smiled faintly. Everyone gets forgotten eventually, Victoria. That's life. Sandra's voice softened but remained firm. But if we've told stories that mattered to someone, if we've made people feel something, then we were never irrelevant to begin with. The audience erupted into applause. Victoria exhaled, setting down her cue cards. She wasn't just impressed. She was changed. Turning to the cameras, she spoke her final words of the night. Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock, maybe Hollywood moves on, but some legacies never fade. As the applause continued, Keanu and Sandra exchanged a small smile. They had never needed validation to know their worth. And they never would. Later, in the quiet of the dressing room, the weight of the conversation still lingered. Sandra finally broke the silence. That was something. Keanu smirked. Yeah. A moment passed before she spoke again. Well, do you ever think about it? Keanu glanced at her. Think about what? A legacy. What we leave behind. Keanu was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Yeah. Sometimes. Sandra sighed. Do you think it's enough? Keanu's gaze softened. More than enough. She studied him. How do you know? Keanu smiled. Because people don't remember what you did. They remember how you made them feel. Sandra nodded, then smirked. So, what's next? Keanu chuckled. Dinner. Sandra laughed. I meant in life, dummy. Keanu shrugged. More stories, more moments. The rest doesn't matter as much. Sandra smiled. Yeah, that's enough. They stood arms linked, walking into the night. No cameras, no spotlight. Just two friends, living, and that was more than enough.